Hi, welcome to Pine Tribe's video interviews. I'm Martin Bjergegaard, and with us today we have Cosmina Popa. Welcome, Cosmina.
Thank you, Martin.
And you're in Washington, D.C., I understand?
Yes, I am today. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your big message for the world?
It's something that I've embraced as my own, but it's an old message, which is that work is love made visible. And this is a quote from a poet, Kahir Gibran. And it's something that I think about a lot in my own life, and then most of my work is centered around this, which is how can we show up to life and work in a way that's consistent with who we are and aligned with our purpose.
Okay, so work is love made visible. That was what you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the ultimate positive view on work, as I interpret it.
Yes.
It's the direct opposite of that you go to work to make a living.
Correct.
And how is that message perceived in your surroundings?
In my world.
In your world?
I think we're slowly working towards it. It's an interesting context. We've set up an accelerator to support businesses that are aligned with this notion of higher purpose, that have an emphasis on the culture of the organizations and where it's okay to talk about words like love. So that's a beginning. I think that we're not there yet, and I think the context of being in the United States, it's a very masculine society. It's very much about doing. It's very much about competing and achieving, and not so much about allowing life to sort of tell you what life needs out of you, rather than always you being the one saying, this is what I want to see, this is what I want to change. And so does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're from Europe originally, right?
Yes, I am. Yes, Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I spent the last 5 years in London.
Okay, so how do you see those areas compare? The US, the UK, your home country?
My home country. So my home country is Romania, and I'm sort of blessed to have lived through communism. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's been a tremendous experience, and always allows me to put things in perspective. There are definitely comparisons. I think and it may not even be fair to look at it just because of the context. So the UK, I got to London right before the crisis started. So I think that I didn't necessarily experience the best version of London. But there's certainly more emphasis on self-discovery and emphasis on really getting to the bottom of who you are. And that's perhaps just my universe within London, probably more so than here. And I'm not sure if that's because there's more optimism. Things are sort of a little bit easier to get done in the States, and people are not necessarily forced to the bottom of themselves, as it were.
Okay, yeah. So you are part of running Conscious Venture Lab?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you tell a bit about that?
Sure. So our purpose is as we stated, is to change the way capitalism is practiced in America. And I like to
change the way capitalism is practiced. That's a big mission, right?
That's a huge mission, and I like to say and beyond, because the way capitalism is practiced in America certainly affects the rest of the world. And so we began with this notion that capitalism is actually a good thing. And there's actually a quote from Ed Freeman that says that it's essentially the most successful form of human engagement or cooperation. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote. And however, it's lost its way. And we see a lot of that happening in the US. So all of these pushes towards outsourcing and getting things done cheaply, not really looking at supply chains, not looking at leadership, not looking at the culture within organizations. So there's some unfortunate outcomes of that, like collapsed factories in Bangladesh, for example. And so our mission is to, take a look at that. And this began essentially, there's a movement, the Conscious Capitalism Institute has started to raise awareness of the fact that there is a different way of doing business. That doesn't necessarily mean putting the shareholder or your stockholder at the center of your business model. Yeah. So you don't have to go for, driving or pushing your suppliers, squeezing your suppliers to give you the best possible, deal financially, but you actually work with them to treat them as partners and get them engaged in your success. And so it's an exciting journey.
And what do you think is the main challenge, since it's not happening yet to a bigger extent than it is? Because I mean, there's been written a lot of books about it, and yes. Academia focuses a lot on it. That mm-hmm. capitalism should be more conscious, or more holistic, or there are many different terms for it. But mm-hmm. What do you think is? And in some ways, one might argue that it is happening here and there. But for a big breakthrough to come through, why is that not happening in your view?
Sure, I think that's a great question. I think we need more thoughtful guidance for entrepreneurs. And I speak to that because we've decided that one way to do it is to grow more companies from the ground up that give themselves permission to adopt this sort of innovation on a business model. And so having, more thoughtful guidance and supportive ecosystems is tremendously important. And in line with that, the right type of capital, and this is a big task for us, aligning investors and making it clear that, conscious capitalism isn't really the same as social enterprise. That's a part of it, but it's a bigger thing. It's a bigger story. And so there's naturally this, we end up having conversations with impact investors, and this is perhaps the biggest challenge, that money gets invested in startups and just diverting more capital to businesses that are starting this way, so that they don't have to fall into the existing frameworks of, okay, this is your stockholder, you need to go public now, or the pressures that are put on business owners to make decisions to suit the interests of the shareholder. So just having more, and I suppose getting that balance right between long-term profit or short-term profit and long-term growth. I think that's key.
Yeah. Also, it's quite complex, isn't it, to have a dual or even a triple bottom line. As long as you are optimizing for profit, mm-hmm. then you can tell if it's going good or bad mm-hmm. by looking at a number, and also that's what normally newspaper would like to write about, and investors would like to see. And if you have done an IPO, then it's definitely going to be a lot of focus on that, on your right. profit, and that has been for some hundreds of years in different shapes. That's been kind of the measure, to focus mm-hmm. on the profit you're making when you're setting up a company. And for the last couple of decades or something, and particularly in the last 5-10 years, as I see it, there's been more and more focused on not only optimizing profit, but also optimizing other things, and maybe have a holistic stakeholder view. But it surely does add a lot of complexity, because when are you then actually in good shape, and when should you be improving? Mm-hmm. Stakeholders, who are they, and how do we measure how happy they are, and all this added complexity. Is that part of the challenge as you see it?
I think there is definitely an element of complexity, but I think it's valuable to look at, and there's simplicity on the other side of it, and that's more valuable once you get there, because you've had a chance to analyze all of those different engagements. And in terms of, profit is important, but we tend to lead with purpose. And we stay away from the discussion of, double or triple bottom line, because the belief is really that if you get the purpose right, profit follows, and you'll create such tremendous engagement with your employees and your customers that it's almost as long as you're mindful of all of the stakeholders, you don't really need to have the conversation around and double or triple bottom line. So because the community and the planet, those are stakeholder groups as well.
And aren't there sometimes trade-off in your view, or quite often? And one example is that it's a couple of years back, but there was a big thing up here in Denmark about one of our big medical companies who were producing HIV medicine. Of course, they had a patent and they were selling it around the world. And then in South Africa, where this is a huge problem, they couldn't afford to pay for it. So they actually asked this company to donate it. And they refused. And they refused to abandon the patent for South Africa, which was the other suggestion that came up. Because if they allowed them to produce it locally ignore the patent, then they could do it very cheap. But the big company didn't want to do that, and that of course caused a lot of bad PR. But they protected themselves they defended themselves by saying that if there's a reason we have patents. If we didn't have patents, we couldn't have attracted investment in the first place. We couldn't have discovered this new medicine, and then we couldn't have cured millions, or at least made their lives a lot easier. But so in a situation like that, what do you think is the right way to go as a conscious business? How would you have been doing this if you were the CEO of a business like that?
Oh, that's a great question. So my world really revolves around entrepreneurs, and the conversation of patents is an interesting one in that case. It depends on the industry that they work in. A lot of entrepreneurs don't really even go the patent route. They think that it's the first mover advantage is really all they have. So I'm not as familiar with the IP process. But there's certainly examples of companies that have been around for over 125 years, like Johnson & Johnson. No company being perfect, but they have just, part of their mission is to, be mindful of who they serve. And yeah, I'm not familiar with that case. I wouldn't know how to necessarily comment on it, but and it's a question of balance and really not thinking in terms of trade-offs and creating different paths to value.
Yeah. And I have an example also from my own life, because I've been running a company that where we were working with charities to collect donations for them, help them get more donations.
Okay.
And we still own a big part of that company. And I would like to talk about the dual purpose there, which is both to get donations, because the charities can really use that to improve lives, to save lives, and I think that that was a big part of my reason for doing that company. And at the same time, I found out that was the market, at least in Europe, wasn't really ready for that kind of talk yet. Because if you were to say something like that to a journalist, and you were still a company which could ultimately produce a profit, you could easily be accused of just trying to pretend to be something you're not, because you're not a non-profit, you are a company, which I believe was the right structure to do this in order to attract investment and to be able to give co-ownership to employees and to have the right energy in the company. But it was very, very difficult to defend towards a journalist, not in a moral way, but in reality, right? And they have the last word and they write it. So the article. So we actually decided just to, not talk anything about that, but just say, we are a service company for the charity industry. And there are so many companies who provide services for charities. We are one of them. And we are trying to do a good job. And then everything was fine. it was so dangerous to go down the route and start talking about impact, start talking about improving the world and doing something good and having a bigger cause, because there were journalists ready to sack you if you started saying something like that. Whereas if you just stuck to the old paradigm, yes, we're a business, we're trying to serve our customers well, okay, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see that a lot, and that's I'm curious as to how you came to when that shift happened in the way that you talked about the business. This is a conversation I had just yesterday with someone that had a nonprofit and created a benefit corporation, which is sort of a hybrid type of company in the U.S. That's fairly new, and this allows you to integrate your mission and your purpose in the bylaws of the company, so the shareholders cannot sue you for caring about the planet or your people. So this is an innovation in that legal structure for a company, but they came across the same problems. The being a nonprofit that's doing good can make it a lot harder for you to raise capital.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and to get good, decent PR and all those kind of things. And the challenge is very close to me, because even my own dad, he, when we talk about this company, he says, so you're trying to make money on poor people, on misery. And I'm, in my view, what we're doing is that we're doing a company that does something good. Instead, I could have done made a company that sold, fatty foods or sugar or alcohol or even weapons. I, of course, wouldn't do that. But if you're doing those kind of things, or gasoline or whatever, then it's completely okay if you profit maximize. No one would expect anything else of you. That's completely okay. If you make $1 billion on oil, that's just awesome. If you make $1 billion curing cancer or working with charities, that's maybe not that awesome, which I think is a bit weird, right? But right. So I'm curious to learn because you're working with a lot of startups, kind of similar to what we are doing, what we have been doing. If this is also something you're seeing in the States, and if are you seeing the situation improving or staying the same or even worsening?
I think there are definitely silos of entrepreneurs, and we by virtue of the movement that we've aligned ourselves with and the name, the Conscious Venture Lab, we're in the sort of almost done with our first cohort, but we tended to attract more entrepreneurs that have a social mission, if you will. But we would like to see this as just good business. So not necessarily, coming to us, entrepreneurs that come to us with a desire to make a change in the world, but just a desire to build a business. And this leads into something that's very fascinating to me, which is, why do entrepreneurs start businesses? What's the psychology behind wanting to create something that doesn't exist? And very often that's because it's deeply personal, and it's something that they see in the world, a challenge in the world that they want to try and address. Sometimes it's just that they want to, make money and be successful. So there's definitely there are different silos of people building things, and there's more collaboration between, I think, but we need to come to a point where that gap is bridged between entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, where there's not a separate conversation. If your business has a clarity around purpose, and you could be doing anything. There's a great example of a gentleman in Italy, Brunello Cucinelli. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a luxury cashmere company. He's got a factory somewhere in Italy, and it's not something that you would think it's a social impact product or company, and yet he's been able to transform his entire community because of the thing that he does. And so by, you know, the way that he created opportunities for employees, and not just to work, but play, you know, building a library, building a theater, building, you know, everything around it. And the product is a luxury product. So it doesn't need to be, you know, I'm solving or curing cancer, or I'm solving a massive problem in the world. It's just anything that you as an entrepreneur feel, if there's an imperative for you to create a business, take a look at this business model where it doesn't, you know, it's not focused on just maximizing profits.
Okay, yeah. So it could be a cigarette factory where they had a great playground and
no, well,
nice
there are places that
sessions.
we don't go to. No cigarettes, no arms, yeah, no guns, but yeah, obviously with exceptions, but.
Yeah.
By and large, you know, like there's my business partner says you could be making forks. It's how you do it that matters. You know.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting point, and I guess it is also very difficult to judge what is a meaningful service, what is a meaningful product, because for some people, for instance, one of the other businesses we have here at Rainmaking, they're making a fantasy football game,
mm-hmm.
and I don't, you know, it's for soccer. I don't watch soccer. I don't play games,
right.
play computer games. So it's difficult for me to relate to. But I can see how that product actually creates joy for a lot of the users.
Others. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and that they're really into it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this, you know, experience, this half an hour a day where they play this game, is just as important as my half an hour where I watch some silly series on HBO or Netflix.
Right.
And if that's the case, then it's really important.
Absolutely.
Because
yeah.
it's, you know, it's the enjoyment and it's the recharging for the next day, and all that. So I become more and more humble on actually judging what is a good service, what is a good product. So I can see that makes sense what you and your co-founder has arrived at there.
Yes, and we had applications from gaming companies as well, and I remember looking at it thinking, well, let's think about, you know, let's put it in a perspective of, you know, what's the impact of these games on the mind, and, you know, looking at the neuroscience, and is this something that I really want to, you know, promote? But I also came to that realization that things get built every day, and you can't, it's not for me to decide what should or should not prosper. And so if people love to play video games, then what we could do is look at how that business is built, and how, you know, the employees are treated, and how, you know, that corporate citizen behaves in the world. So that's where we could have an impact, rather than saying, well, don't do this, you know.
Yeah. So
there's definitely a market.
So the key is, I'm just to see if I can sum that up. Then the key is how this company treats employees. Mm-hmm. If it's hurting the, you know, ecosystem, the planet, or if it's eco-friendly.
Right.
If it's a positive part of the community. Mm-hmm. If it's, you know, I think also it will need to pay its taxes and obey the law and things like that.
Right.
Is it that, I wouldn't say simple, but is it like those dimensions you focused on?
Sure. Yeah. So they're stakeholder groups. So, you know, anyone that touches your business or is touched by your business. So that's, you know, definitely your employees, your customers, the community in which you operate, the supply chain, and yes, the environment, and so different segments of groups of people that are affected by what you do. And we see that in, you know, the companies there are examples of this. It's not something new. It's, as I say, good business that some visionary business people have practiced and managed to do in a way that didn't, you know, I guess they didn't succumb to making compromises. And perhaps that leads to slower growth. but more sustainable businesses. So there are examples, like one example of a company that just went public in the US is the Container Store. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm sorry, I'm not actually.
No,
Container
okay.
Store.
So they went through that. They started in Texas, and they went through that process of the IPO and looking at different partners. To lead them through that, and even in the conversations at the beginning, they made sure that what was important to them and what they stand for was discussed before even talking about what they needed from the investor. So if you as an investor don't want to have this conversation, then let's not talk about it, because these things are not going to change. So we are going to pay our employees a fair wage. We're going to invest in training. We're going to give them more. Actually, they give probably about as much holiday as they do in Europe, this company, which is unusual for the US. So there are examples, they're not new, and it's just, looking at not necessarily reverse engineering that sort of success, but really looking at and celebrating that and saying, let's encourage more startups to work this way rather than, build businesses the traditional way and then get to a point where things need to change.
And part of what you're doing at Conscious Venture Lab is attracting investors for your startups, right?
Yes.
And that's exactly the same as we're doing at Startup Bootcamp.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know, how do the investors react to a company having a strong focus on employees and maybe even giving more vacation than is the standard in the US? And things like that, because of course some investors could think that this is compromising the possibilities for a great return for me as an investor.
Sure.
So can
yes,
can you also gather a lot of I know if we just at stage when we're doing a startup bootcamp investor, and when we have like 300 or 400 investors in the room, I wouldn't advise the startup to say something like that. And I would feel bad about advising against it, because I think it's part of the solution in the world, the exact things you're just saying, and we have so many problems because we don't adhere to those principles. And I would just also have to admit that the investors that are gathered in the room will probably feel a bit uncomfortable if they hear that in this team we actually have a lot of vacation, because we think that's important. I would rather say do it and be honest about it, but don't make a big fuss about it. Focus on something else, which is not really that cool, because yeah.
So this wasn't, just to clarify, this wasn't a startup that said, because I think actually you probably can relate to this. We need to struggle to get time off, as entrepreneurs. So it's quite the opposite. But this was an established business that went through an IPO process and was encouraged. And the CEO said, guys, I'm selling empty boxes. This is my business. How do you think people are excited about coming to work every day? Because part of it is that I treat them fairly. So in terms of the startups, we haven't gone through a demo day yet, and I think it will be interesting to the notion of well, I hope actually that some of the teams will need to do that. So it's really build something that people will want and buy, and then focus on reaching that growth in a way that's comfortable to you. So if you don't want, I would rather not encourage them to go into an engagement with an investor if they're not aligned. So this is definitely something that we work on. It's a mixed bag. Investors say, I just want to know, what my profit is going to be, because they have a duty, obviously, to generate the best returns. And there are the ones that say, you know what, I see that there are pressures in the world that are conspiring for this to happen. So, the millennials generations, they want workplaces that are allowing them to flourish as individuals. They don't want to be stuck in cubicles. They don't want to be, in places where the leadership style or management style is command and control, where they can be, engaged and transparency. There's actually a Forbes article that came out, I think earlier this year, that said only conscious capitalism will survive. And those sorts of things are good for our movement. The more awareness there is that it's not impact, it's not social, it's just good business. And as an investor, look at it. You make your own, you do your due diligence. So we try not to lead with, it's social, or you're making an impact by investing in this. It's really just, it's a good business, and it happens to have a higher purpose, and it happens to have, great relationships with employees and stakeholders.
Yeah. That's cool.
But it's a journey.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And thanks so much for sharing your experiences with that journey so far. And I wish you all the best. And hopefully I can come and witness one of your demo days one
well,
time
actually,
and ask the investors themselves.
Indeed. Well, you may have a chance if you're. We'll talk offline. But yeah, September.
That's great. Thanks so much, Cosmina.
Thank you,
Have
Martin.
a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Take care.
Bye.